Hi everybody, welcome to DroneZoneUK podcast episode number 2. So we're still very young in our podcast journey. I hope you enjoyed the first episode. If you didn't, just delete it. Hopefully you'll get something a little more exciting out of this particular episode. And here's a little rundown of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking propellers. Just some little tips for newbies to the drone world, and even for those hardened veterans who may not follow the set of actions that I follow in order to keep my drone, which is right here, the Phantom 4 Standard. It's my go-to drone. I love it. It's very robust, very versatile, and I just want to share some tips on how I keep the drone running. So I heard on somewhere on the internet, I can't remember where, there's a company who will take your drone away and fit it up with all sorts of better than entry level parts, and they'll basically clean your drone up, make sure it's running tip top, which is really cool. But for those of you and those of me who don't want to spend an absurd amount of money on fixing it up with all sorts of new fandangle things, and you just want to keep your drone running nice and smoothly and cleanly, these are the tips for you. Before I get into that, I just wanted to touch on a news story that has been all over the press in the past couple of days for the right reasons, but unfortunately for the saddest of reasons. And I wanted to talk about it because it's aviation related. It's regarding the helicopter crash at Leicester City Football Club in Leicester, obviously. And sadly, the owner, Vishai, I won't pronounce his surname. Unfortunately lost his life along with 4 other passengers. So there were 5 fatalities in total in this particular helicopter crash. I know that right now the investigation is still ongoing, and the Transportation Safety Board are going to be looking at it, and I think I heard today that the black box has been retrieved, and they'll be looking at the flight recorder, the flight data recorder, for any clues that can offer any insight whatsoever to what happened. I'm sure they'll be working, around the clock and vigorously to work out exactly what caused this tragedy to happen. And I'm sure everybody who is a drone pilot and a pilot of any form, whether you're down on the ground or up in the air, will join me in paying our respects to Vishai and the other passengers that were on the helicopter at the time. It's a very, very sad time for aviation and for anything with a propeller and a rotor. So it cannot come quickly enough, the investigation conclusion, and trying to work out what happened so that it never happens again. Unfortunately, crashes and fatalities are still something that we have to deal with in modern aviation, and it's a real shame. Unfortunately, it is a risk that is always apparent, and for pilots like myself who are never up in the sky, we're always on the ground, we have that kind of sense of safety all of the time where if the drone crashes, at least we're not on board. But it should make you bear in mind the rules and regulations, certainly within the UK airspace, that the CAA have put in place. You can find them at DroneSafe.uk. The podcast, the first podcast, brushes over the drone code. Once again, you can download the drone code in PDF format from DroneSafe.uk. And they are rules that everybody should be following for a nice, safe flight. So please do. That said, let's move onwards and upwards. My first point was I was going to talk about the Phantom 4 and keeping it nice and clean and airworthy. And one of the main things that you need to keep clean are your propellers. And the reason being, when these bad boys are going around at however many RPMs, they're obviously connecting with bugs and whatever up there in the air and you'll see here, hopefully, that there are some, I like to call it flight residue. I don't really like talking about dead bugs and whatnot, but let's call it flight residue. So every flight, more often than not, you will find that there is some flight residue along the propeller leading and rear edge. And obviously these are plastic, so you know all of that flight residue is if left, it's going to start eating into your propellers and weakening rather the leading edge predominantly, because that's obviously the edge that takes most of the action and most of the residue. So it's really important after every single flight to keep these clean. I've left them uncleaned just so that I could run through this tutorial, if you can call it that. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I've seen a lot online of people asking questions about propellers. How often should they change propellers? And there's no real answer to that. It really depends how many times you're flying, how many hours you're flying, where you're flying. And so, like I said, there's no concrete answer. I've heard many people saying they're not getting any more than 10 hours out of a full set of props, and I find that a little bit unbelievable. But again, I don't know where they're flying. It could be the Amazon rainforest for all I know. So yeah, I probably, out of this set of propellers, I've gotten at least 40 hours, and they're still in mint condition. But that's because every single time I go out with the drone, I come back, and the first thing I do before I take the memory card out and start playing with the footage in post-pro, I always clean both the propellers and the drone unit. So really important. You don't need much to do it. You need a wet wipe and a dry wipe. It's basically that simple. It's as simple as rubbing over and making sure that you get all of that flight residue off. I'm going to clean the full set while I'm on, just so you can see how quickly and easy it is to accomplish. Now, like I said, I've had at least 40 hours of flight time out of this, probably more out of these, sorry. I can't understand why anyone is getting any less than that, certainly not 10 hours. 10 hours is like what? It's either 20 half-hour flights or 10 one-hour flights. And so you're either running into some pretty big bugs, or you're mashing your props up on, I don't know, tree branches and whatnot. But I guess that's down to your flight capabilities. But if you're not flying into obstacles or other things, then you really should be getting a lot longer than 10 hours and 10 flights. And like I said, whilst I've been describing that, I've just wiped off pretty much all of the flight residue from my propellers. And so once the wet wipe has been used, just dry any liquid off that remains on the propellers. And you'll see, if you do this yourself, you will see that immediately the propellers look as good as you first got them straight out of the packaging. So it's not hard to do, and if you do it, you're going to get a lot more lifetime out of each propeller. And I'm not sure if you can see the close-up detail there. Let's do it on that camera and see. But that's pretty mint. It looks brand new, because it basically is brand new. Missed a bit. Now, obviously, like I said before, if you do fly into any trees, branches, brick walls, whatever, and I don't have them with me, but I've got a set of props where I had an unfortunate incident, shall we say, with a tree branch, and it kind of ripped a shred in the propeller. I would never put that propeller back on the drone, no matter what, because you don't want to mess around with that, obviously. These things are a lot of money. So I will show it on a future episode. But obviously, if you damage your propellers, you're not going to put them back on the drone. If you do, then I'm sorry, but you're an idiot. But if it's just a bit of flight residue, like I said, bugs and whatnot, it wipes off quite quickly and easily with a wet wipe and a dry wipe. Job done. There you go. 4 propellers used over 40 hours, and hopefully I'll get another 40 hours out of them. That simple. I'm just going to grab the drone unit, and as you may be able to see here on the front of the drone, there is some flight residue. And this will get on the battery, it will get on the drone. You can probably see a little crack there, which I'm going to talk about how I repair on another podcast. But this all needs cleaning off as well. Obviously, you don't want the flight residue eating into the drone casing, because that's going to mean you can't fly it if it damages it beyond repair. And there you have it. That's how to keep your propellers nice and clean and in use for certainly more than the average I've heard about, which is 10 hours. Utterly ridiculous if you keep them nice and pristine like I do. That's not including the incident that I had where I battered a few propellers, but we'll talk about that later. And that's it for this particular podcast. That's number 2. I'm going to go on straight away and hopefully record podcast number 3. So please tune into that, and thanks for watching. See you next time.